Officer Sarah Mitchell sat in her police cruiser on the side of a snow-covered road, her hands trembling on the steering wheel as tears streamed down her face, the radio crackling with cheerful voices wishing each other Merry Christmas while she felt more alone than she'd ever been in her 32 years of life. The engine had died 20 minutes ago, her phone had no signal, and the irony wasn't lost on her, a cop trained to help others, now stranded and helpless on Christmas Eve, with nowhere to go and no one to call, even if she could. She'd volunteered for the holiday shift again this year, just like last year and the year before, telling herself it was noble, that she was letting officers with families spend time with their loved ones. But the truth sat heavy in her chest like a stone. She had no family to go home to, not anymore, not since the argument with her sister 3 years ago. The one that shattered everything, the one she was too proud to fix. Sarah wiped her eyes roughly with the back of her hand, her breath coming out in visible puffs in the freezing car, when suddenly headlights appeared through the falling snow, and a blue pickup truck slowed to a stop beside her. A man in his mid-30s with kind eyes and concern etched across his face rolled down his window, and before he could speak, a small voice from inside his truck called out, "Daddy, is that police lady okay?" Sarah tried to compose herself, to slip back into her professional mask, but her voice cracked when she said, "I'm fine, just car trouble," though they both knew she was anything but fine. The man introduced himself as Michael Torres, and the little girl with dark braids and bright, curious eyes was his daughter Emma, age 7, and Michael didn't hesitate. He immediately offered to give her a ride, to call a tow truck from his house just 2 miles down the road, and something about the genuine warmth in his offer, the lack of pity but presence of real human kindness, made Sarah's carefully constructed walls begin to crack. She accepted, grabbing her coat and bag, and climbed into the warm truck, where Emma immediately said, "You are crying. My daddy cries sometimes too, especially when he looks at pictures of mommy," and Michael's face flushed as he gently corrected, "Emma, sweetheart." But Sarah found herself touched by the child's honesty, by the reminder that she wasn't the only one carrying grief. As they drove through the peaceful, snow-blanketed streets of the small town, past houses glowing with colorful lights and families visible through windows, Emma chattered about Christmas Eve traditions, about the cookies they were going to leave for Santa, about how her daddy always read her the same story her mommy used to read. And Sarah felt something long dormant stir in her chest, a longing, a memory of what family used to feel like before everything fell apart. When they arrived at Michael's modest but warmly lit home, a 2-story house with a wreath on the door and Emma's drawings taped to the windows. Michael invited Sarah inside while he called for a tow truck, but when he hung up the phone, his expression was apologetic. No trucks available until the day after Christmas. Everything was closed. Everyone was with family. Sarah assured him it was fine, that she'd call a taxi, stay at a motel, but even as she said it, she knew how hollow it sounded, how the thought of spending Christmas alone in a motel room made her want to break down all over again. And Emma, with the intuition children sometimes have, tugged on her father's sleeve and whispered loudly enough for Sarah to hear, "Daddy, can the police lady have Christmas with us? She's all alone, and Mommy always said nobody should be alone on Christmas." Michael looked at Sarah with a question in his eyes, not wanting to overstep, but clearly moved by his daughter's compassion. And Sarah, who normally would have politely declined, who would have retreated into her isolation like armor, found herself nodding, accepting, whispering a grateful "if it's not too much trouble." What followed was an evening that would change Sarah's life forever, not through grand gestures or dramatic moments, but through small acts of inclusion, of being seen, of being welcomed into the sacred space of someone else's family traditions. Emma insisted. Sarah helped decorate the last of the cookies, the kitchen counter covered in frosting and sprinkles, and as Sarah carefully piped icing onto a star-shaped cookie, she remembered doing this exact thing with her younger sister Claire, 25 years ago. both of them laughing and sneaking bites of dough, while their mother pretended not to notice. And the memory was so vivid and painful that she had to pause, had to breathe through the ache. Michael noticed, he seemed to notice everything, and quietly shared his own story, while Emma played in the living room. His wife Rachel had died 2 years ago from an illness, sudden and devastating, leaving him to raise Emma alone, to be both mother and father, to carry grief while still creating joy for his daughter. And some days he didn't think he could do it, didn't think he was enough, but Emma's resilience, her capacity for love and hope despite loss, kept him going. Sarah listened, really listened, and found herself sharing too about her sister Claire, about the argument over their mother's estate, about words spoken in anger that couldn't be taken back, about pride and stubbornness that had calcified into 3 years of silence, about how she'd thrown herself into work to avoid facing the gaping hole where her family used to be, and saying it all out loud to this stranger who somehow didn't feel like a stranger, was like lancing a wound she'd been carrying for too long. "It's not too late, you know," Michael said softly, his eyes meeting hers with understanding. "It's never too late to say you're sorry, to try again, Rachel, and I always said we'd have time to take that trip, time to say all the things we meant to say, but time ran out, and I'd give anything for one more conversation, one more chance." His words hit Sarah like a physical force, the truth of them undeniable. And she realized with sudden clarity that she'd been punishing herself as much as her sister, that the loneliness she felt wasn't inevitable, but chosen, a consequence of her own fear and pride. Emma called them into the living room, where she'd set up a blanket fort, and the 3 of them sat inside the cozy space lit by Christmas lights. And Emma asked Sarah to tell them about being a police officer, about helping people. And Sarah found herself talking about why she'd chosen this career, because her father had been an officer, because he'd taught her about service and protection, about being there for your community. But she realized as she spoke that somewhere along the way, she'd forgotten that community included herself, that she deserved care and connection too. Emma, tired from the excitement of the day, curled up against her father and asked him to tell the story about Mummy's first Christmas. And Michael's voice was tender and sad and beautiful as he recounted how Rachel had insisted on cooking their entire first Christmas dinner from scratch, despite never having cooked a turkey before, how everything had gone wrong, how they'd ended up eating burnt turkey and laughing until they cried, how it had been perfect, precisely because it was imperfect, because they were together, and Sarah saw the way he held his daughter, the way he kept his wife's memory alive with love instead of letting it become a source of bitterness. And she wondered if she could do the same with her own family memories, if she could transform her regret into action. As Emma drifted to sleep, Michael carried her to bed, and when he returned, he and Sarah sat in the gentle glow of the Christmas tree, the house quiet except for the soft sound of snow against the windows. And Sarah said, "Thank you, you didn't have to do any of this, didn't have to welcome a stranger into your home, into your Christmas." And Michael smiled, a sad but genuine smile, and replied, "You're not a stranger. Grief and loneliness recognize each other, and besides, you helped us too. You gave Emma a chance to practice the kindness her mother always showed, and you reminded me that opening your heart, even when it's been broken, is the only way to heal." They talked until late into the night, about loss and hope, about the families they'd had, and the ones they were trying to build, about second chances and new beginnings. And somewhere in those quiet hours, Sarah made a decision, a promise to herself that she wouldn't let another day pass without trying to reach her sister, without attempting to bridge the gap she'd allowed to grow so wide. When Christmas morning came, soft and bright, Emma woke them with excited whispers about Santa's visit, and they sat together, opening the simple gifts under the tree. And Michael handed Sarah a small wrapped package, saying Emma had insisted. And inside was a hand-drawn picture from Emma, showing 3 stick figures labeled, "Daddy, Me, and Miss Sarah, with a message in a child's careful handwriting. Family is people who care about you. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were different tears, cleansing tears, healing tears, and she hugged Emma and thanked her, telling her she was right, that she was wise beyond her years, that this was the most meaningful gift she'd ever received. After breakfast, Michael drove Sarah to a phone store that was miraculously open for a few hours, and Sarah bought a new phone, her hands shaking as she looked up her sister's number, the one she'd memorized but been too afraid to dial. And with Michael and Emma waiting in the truck, giving her privacy but also silent support, she pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, and Sarah almost hung up, almost let fear win again. But then she heard her sister's voice, cautious and uncertain. "Hello." And Sarah's voice broke as she said, "Claire, it's me. It's Sarah, and I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry for everything, for the things I said, for the years I wasted being stubborn and proud, and I know I don't deserve it. But I'm asking if maybe, possibly, we could try again, if you could forgive me." There was silence on the other end, stretching so long that Sarah thought the call had dropped, but then she heard her sister crying. And Claire's voice came through, thick with emotion. "I've been waiting for this call for 3 years. I've picked up the phone 100 times and been too scared to dial. And yes, Sarah, yes, I forgive you. I've already forgiven you, and I miss you. I miss my sisters so much." They talked and cried and laughed. 3 years of pain and longing pouring out in words that should have been said long ago. And Claire told her about her life, about her 2 children Sarah had never met, about how she'd hoped Sarah would be in their lives, would be their aunt, and Sarah promised she would be, promised she'd do better, be better, show up and stay present. And when she finally hung up, when she climbed back into the truck, Michael didn't have to ask. Her face told the whole story, radiant with relief and joy and hope. She said, "Yes," Sarah whispered. "We're having dinner next week. I'm going to meet my niece and nephew. I'm going to be part of my family again." And Emma cheered. And Michael reached over and squeezed her hand, a gesture of celebration and connection. And Sarah realized that in less than 24 hours, these 2 people had given her back something she thought she'd lost forever, the courage to be vulnerable, to ask for what she needed, to believe in redemption. As they drove back to Michael's house to pick up Sarah's belongings, the tow truck having been rescheduled for later that afternoon, Sarah looked at the snow-covered town with new eyes, seeing not isolation but community, not endings but possibilities. And she thought about the strange and beautiful way life works. How sometimes your darkest moment is just the pause before the light. How sometimes being lost is the first step to being found. Before she left, Sarah knelt down to Emma's level and said, "Thank you for sharing your Christmas with me, for reminding me what kindness looks like, and for teaching me that family isn't just about blood, it's about who shows up, who cares, who makes room at the table." And Emma hugged her tightly and said, "You can come back next Christmas too if you want." And Sarah promised she would, understanding that this little girl and her father had become part of her story now, part of her chosen family, part of her journey back to wholeness. Michael walked her to the tow truck when it finally arrived, and they exchanged numbers, not out of obligation, but genuine friendship, a recognition that some connections are meant to last. And as Sarah sat in her repaired cruiser, engine running smoothly, she didn't feel the crushing loneliness that had consumed her just yesterday. Instead, she felt gratitude, hope, and a quiet determination to honor the gift she'd been given by living differently, loving more openly, and never again letting pride keep her from the people who mattered. She drove toward her sister's house, the afternoon sun breaking through the clouds. And she thought about Officer Sarah Mitchell from yesterday, lost alone, convinced she had to carry everything by herself, and she said a quiet goodbye to that version of herself, making space for the woman she was becoming. Someone who understood that asking for help wasn't weakness, that accepting love wasn't surrender, that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is let someone in. The moral of Sarah's story was simple but profound. We are never as alone as we think we are, and sometimes the family we need finds us in the most unexpected places. But we have to be willing to be found, to drop our defenses, to let love reach us even in our darkest moments. Because every ending carries within it the seed of a new beginning, and every moment of genuine human connection has the power to change everything. All we have to do is say yes to it, to show up, to be brave enough to be broken, and still believe we can be whole again, and to remember that the best gift we can ever give or receive is the simple, sacred act of not letting someone face their pain alone.